In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a truth that even the most advanced species struggle to comprehend. Gratitude is not merely an emotion, it is a force capable of reshaping reality itself. The Zephyrians had ruled the Andromeda sector for 3 millennia, their crystalline cities floating among the stars, their technology so advanced it seemed like magic to lesser beings. They had encountered thousands of species, catalogued their strengths and weaknesses, and filed them away as either useful or irrelevant. Humans, they decided, fell into the latter category. Small, short-lived, technologically primitive, and emotionally unstable. The assessment was clear. The bipedal mammals from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star were destined for nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. The Zephyrians' calculations showed a 0.03% probability that humans would ever achieve interstellar significance. They were wrong. Not about human limitations. Those were real enough. They were wrong about what mattered. Because while the Zephyrians measured strength in plasma yields and calculated worth in technological advancement, they had never learned to measure the power of a grateful heart. They had never witnessed what happens when a species that has nothing to give decides to give everything anyway. This is the story of how the weakest species in known space became the catalyst for the greatest transformation the galaxy had ever seen. This is the story of how gratitude, pure, selfless, and infinite, became the force that shifted the destiny of worlds. And it all began with a single act of kindness that no one thought would matter. The dying embers of Earth's last city cast long shadows across the rubble-strewn streets where Captain Elena Vasquez picked her way carefully through the debris. Her worn boots crunched on fragments of glass and twisted metal, each step a reminder of how far humanity had fallen. The once proud metropolis of New Geneva now lay in ruins, its towering spires reduced to skeletal frames reaching toward a sky choked with smoke and ash. Elena paused at what had once been Central Plaza, her weathered face etched with lines that spoke of too many battles and too few victories. At 35, she looked a decade older, her dark hair streaked with premature grey, her brown eyes holding depths of sorrow that seemed to reflect the dying light of their world. The plasma burns on her left arm throbbed beneath hastily applied biogel, a souvenir from yesterday's failed defense of the northern sector. The Void Hunters had come without warning, as they always did. Their massive bioships had descended from the stars like living nightmares, their hulls pulsing with organic machinery that defied human understanding. For 3 years, humanity had fought against these alien predators, and for 3 years, they had lost ground with each passing day. The creatures seemed to feed on life itself, consuming entire ecosystems and leaving behind nothing but barren rock and the screams of the dying. "Captain!" came a voice from behind her, rough with exhaustion. Elena turned to see Sergeant Marcus Chen emerging from the ruins of a collapsed apartment building, his tactical gear torn and stained with blood that wasn't entirely his own. "We've got maybe 200 survivors holed up in the subway tunnels. Kids, elderly, wounded. They're asking for you." Elena nodded, her hand instinctively moving to the small device clipped to a belt, their last functioning long-range communicator. 3 days ago, they had received an impossible message through the static of their dying world's communication network. The transmission had been brief, clinical, and utterly unexpected. "This is Science Vessel Lumina of the Zephyrian Collective. We have monitored your species' conflict with the Void Hunters. While our protocols prohibit direct intervention in primitive species affairs, we offer emergency evacuation to a limited number of individuals for research purposes. Respond if interested." The message had sparked heated debates among the survivors. Some saw it as salvation, others as another form of slavery. The Zephyrians were known throughout the local arm of the galaxy as a cold, calculating species that viewed other races as either tools or curiosities. They were not conquerors like the Void Hunters, but neither were they saviors. They were scientists, and their interest in humanity was purely academic. "What did you tell the others?" Elena asked as they made their way through the twisted remains of a memorial garden, where bronze statues of Earth's heroes lay toppled and broken among dying flowers. "Same thing you told us to say," Marcus replied, stepping carefully over a fallen beam. "That we're still thinking about it. But Cap, time's running out. The scouts report more bioships massing in the outer atmosphere. This might be the final push." Elena knew he was right. The Void Hunters had been systematically consuming Earth's biosphere, starting with the oceans and working their way inland. The last estimate suggested they had perhaps 72 hours before the planet became uninhabitable. The Zephyrian offer, cold and clinical as it was, represented humanity's only chance at survival, even if it meant abandoning their home forever. As they descended into the subway tunnels through a partially collapsed entrance, the sounds of the underground refugee camp reached their ears. Children cried softly in their parents' arms, their faces pale and hollow from weeks of inadequate nutrition. The elderly huddled together on makeshift beds of salvaged cloth and debris, their eyes holding the distant look of those who had lived through too much horror. Medical personnel moved between the wounded, doing what they could with rapidly dwindling supplies. Dr. Sarah Kim looked up from where she knelt beside a young boy whose leg had been badly burned by Void Hunter bioplasma. Her usually pristine lab coat was now stained and torn, and dark circles under her eyes spoke of days without proper sleep. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "we need to make a decision soon. I've got 17 people here who won't survive another attack, and our medical supplies are down to emergency reserves." Elena surveyed the faces around her, people who had looked to her for leadership throughout this nightmare, who had trusted her to find a way to keep them alive. They were teachers and engineers, artists and laborers, children who should have been playing in parks instead of hiding in tunnels, elderly grandparents who should have been sharing stories instead of rationing water. They were humanity at its most vulnerable, and the weight of their lives pressed down on her like a physical burden. "The Zephyrian sent another transmission this morning," she said finally, her voice carrying across the tunnel despite its quiet tone. "They're willing to take 50 people. Children and those with useful skills get priority." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. 200 survivors, 50 spaces. The mathematics of survival had never been crueler. "We should send the children," said Mrs. Patterson, an elderly teacher whose silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun despite their circumstances. "They deserve a chance to grow up, even if it's not here." "But who decides?" asked Tom Bradley, a structural engineer whose expertise had kept many of their underground shelters intact. "Who has the right to choose who lives and who dies?" The debate that followed was passionate but respectful, a testament to the dignity these people maintained even in their darkest hour. Some argued for a lottery system, others for selection based on skills that might be useful to the Zephyrians. A few suggested that families should stay together regardless of the consequences. Through it all, Elena listened and watched, noting not just the words but the gestures, the way people reached out to comfort others even while discussing their own potential doom. She saw Marcus quietly sharing his water ration with a family whose container had been damaged. She watched Dr. Pan, Kim continuing to treat patients even as she participated in the discussion about evacuation. She observed the way people instinctively moved to shield the children from the worst of the conversation. It was then that Elena made a decision that would change the course of galactic history, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. "I'll contact the Zephyrians," she said, standing slowly and feeling the weight of command settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. "But I want to try something first." The walk to the surface took 15 minutes, navigating through debris and collapsed sections that required careful climbing. Elena emerged into the hellscape that had once been one of Earth's most beautiful cities, the communicator heavy in her hands. The sky above was a canvas of orange and red, painted by fires that had burned unchecked for weeks, and the alien lights of Void Hunter bioships that hung like malevolent stars in the smoke-choked atmosphere. She activated the device and waited for the connection to establish. When the Zephyrian voice came through, it was as cold and clinical as before, speaking in perfect English with an accent that suggested the language had been learned through analysis rather than conversation. "This is Science Vessel Lumina. We have been monitoring your communications. Have you reached a decision regarding evacuation?" Elena took a deep breath, tasting ash and the bitter tang of dying vegetation. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez, speaking for the survivors of New Geneva. We have a proposition." There was a pause. Then, clarification requested. "Our offer was for emergency evacuation of research subjects, not negotiation." "We understand that," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose. "But we also understand that you're scientists. We have something that might interest you more than 50 random humans." Another pause, longer this time. Elena could almost hear the alien minds working, calculating probabilities and potential gains. "Specify your proposition." "We want to give you something," Elena said, the words feeling strange as they left her mouth.
"Not trade, not barter."
"Give. Freely. With no expectation of anything in return except the knowledge that it might be useful to you someday." The silence stretched for so long that Elena began to wonder if the connection had been lost. When the Zephyrian voice returned, it carried a note of what might have been confusion, though it was difficult to tell with their synthetic translation methods. Clarification required. You wish to provide resources without receiving compensation or establishing mutual obligation. This does not align with standard transaction protocols for primitive species. Elena found herself smiling despite their dire circumstances. That's exactly right. We want to give you our knowledge, our culture, our stories, our music, our art, our science, everything that makes us human. Not because you're offering to save us, but because we want you to have it. Because maybe someday, somewhere, it might help you or someone else. She paused, looking out over the ruins of humanity's last stand, then continued. We're probably going to die here. The Void Hunters are going to finish what they started, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. But before that happens, we want to make sure that something of humanity survives, even if humans don't. We want to give that to you, not as payment or as a bargaining chip, but as a gift. The silence that followed was different from the previous pauses. It seemed to stretch across the void of space, carrying with it implications that Elena couldn't fully grasp. When the Zephyrian responded, their voice had changed in subtle ways that the translation software couldn't quite capture. This proposition is unprecedented. No species in our database has offered freely given resources during extinction-level events. What do you expect to gain from this transaction?
Nothing. Eleanor said simply.
That's the point. We're not trying to buy our survival or earn your favor. We just want to give you something beautiful, something good that came from our world. Maybe you'll never need it. Maybe you'll just file it away and forget about it. But maybe someday, when you encounter another species that's struggling, or when you face some challenge we can't even imagine, something from humanity will help you. That's enough for us. There was another long pause, and Elena could hear the subtle background hum of powerful computers processing information at speeds her human mind couldn't comprehend. Finally, the Zephyrian voice returned. We require time to analyze this proposition. We will contact you within 6 standard hours. The connection ended, leaving Elena alone on the surface with the dying light of her world painting shadows across the ruins around her. She made her way back to the subway tunnel, where anxious faces turned toward her as she descended. What did they say? Doctor, Kim asked, her hand still busy tending to a patient, even as her attention focused on Elena's report. They're thinking about it, Elena replied, settling onto a makeshift seat formed from stacked concrete blocks. I made them an offer they've never heard before. She explained what had transpired, watching as confusion and hope warred across the faces of her fellow survivors. Some understood immediately what she had proposed, their faces lighting with something that might have been pride. Others struggled with the concept, asking practical questions about how such an arrangement could work. But Captain, said young Jamie Chen, Marcus's teenage nephew who had become the unofficial representative of the children in their group, what if they say no? What if they just take their 50 people and leave? Elena looked at the boy, seeing in his face the future that humanity might never have. Then we'll know we tried to do something beautiful before the end. Sometimes that's all we can do. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness. The survivors organized what they could, creating rough inventories of their knowledge and skills. Teachers began writing down lessons and stories. Engineers sketched diagrams and explanations of human technology. Artists created simple works with whatever materials they could find. Musicians hummed melodies that others tried to transcribe. It was Dr. Kim who suggested they also compile more personal elements, family recipes, cultural traditions, jokes and games, love letters and lullabies. If we're giving them humanity, she said, we should give them all of it, not just the impressive parts. As the deadline approached, Elena found herself thinking about the nature of gift-giving. Throughout human history, the act of giving freely had been considered one of their species' defining characteristics. They gave to strangers, to enemies, to those who could never repay them. They gave time and effort and love and resources, often to their own detriment, because something in their nature compelled them to see value in others' well-being. The Zephyrians had called humanity primitive, and in many ways, they were right. Humans couldn't manipulate matter at the molecular level or travel faster than light or predict the future through complex mathematical models. But they could do something that apparently no other species in the Zephyrian database had ever done. They could give without expectation, love without condition, and find meaning in sacrifice. When the communicator finally activated, Elena was ready. She had spent the intervening hours helping compile humanity's gift, working alongside teachers and engineers and artists to create something that would represent the best of their species. Now, as she held the device and waited for the Zephyrian response, She felt a strange sense of peace. "This is Science Vessel Lumina," came the familiar voice. "We have analyzed your proposition and consulted with our collective's governing council. Your offer presents significant analytical challenges, as no existing protocols address freely given resources from extinct or near-extinct species." Elena's heart sank slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "We understand. What have you decided?" "We have decided to accept your gift," the Zephyrian continued, and Elena could swear she heard something approaching emotion in the synthesized voice. "Furthermore, we have been authorized to extend our evacuation offer to all surviving humans in your location. We will transport your entire population to suitable worlds within our territory, where you will be granted autonomous status and provided with resources necessary for species continuation." The tunnel erupted in cheers and tears, the sound echoing off the walls like thunder. Elena felt her knees weaken as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. They were all going to live. Every child, every elder, every wounded soul huddled in these tunnels would have a chance at a future. "Why?" she managed to ask through her tears. "You said 50 people. Why change your minds?" The pause that followed was brief, but when the Zephyrian spoke again, their voice carried harmonics that the translation software had never been programmed to handle. "Because in 3,000 years of galactic exploration, we have never encountered a species that offered to give everything for nothing.
Your gift has introduced variables into our understanding that require extensive study.
We find ourselves curious about beings who would choose generosity over survival. We wish to learn what creates such behavior." Elena laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy that seemed to light up the dark tunnel. Around her, people were embracing, crying, laughing, and planning for a future they had thought was lost forever. Children who had learned to whisper were shouting with excitement. Elderly people who had been preparing for death were suddenly discussing what they wanted to see in the stars. "There's one more thing," the Zephyrian voice continued. "We have detected a massive Void Hunter fleet approaching your position. Our transport capacity is limited, and the evacuation will require multiple trips. We estimate we can remove approximately 60% of your population before the fleet arrives." The joy in the tunnel dimmed as the implications became clear. Even with the expanded offer, not everyone would make it out alive. Elena felt the familiar weight of command settling back onto her shoulders as she realized that the hardest decisions were still ahead. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Approximately 14 standard hours before the fleet enters attack range. We can begin evacuations immediately, but the process cannot be rushed without risking lives." Elena looked around the tunnel, seeing faces that had gone from joy to grim determination in a matter of seconds. These were people who had already survived the impossible, who had maintained their humanity even in the face of extinction. They would find a way to face this final challenge with the same grace they had shown throughout their ordeal. "We'll be ready," she said into the communicator. "And thank you. Whatever happens in the next 14 hours, thank you for giving us hope." As the connection ended, Elena found herself surrounded by the survivors, their faces looking to her for guidance one more time. But for the first time since the war began, she didn't feel the crushing weight of impossible choices. Instead, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The evacuation would be a race against time, a desperate attempt to save as many lives as possible before the final darkness fell. But they had given humanity's gift freely, without expectation, and somehow that simple act of generosity had opened a door to the stars that no amount of bargaining could have unlocked. As the survivors began to organize themselves for the evacuation, Elena couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had discovered something that no amount of advanced technology could replicate: the power of a grateful heart to change the universe itself. The first Zephyrian transport vessel descended through Earth's dying atmosphere like a crystal cathedral given flight, its translucent hull refracting the hellish orange light of the burning world into patterns of surprising beauty. Elena watched from her position at the designated evacuation site, a cleared section of what had once been the city's main airport, as the ship settled onto the cracked tarmac with impossible grace, its landing feet extending like delicate glass sculptures to distribute its weight. The sight of their salvation should have filled her with relief, but instead, Elena felt the familiar knot of responsibility tightening in her stomach. Around her, the first group of evacuees waited in orderly lines, their few possessions clutched in makeshift bags and carriers. She had organized them herself. All the children under 12, pregnant women, the most critically injured, and a handful of essential personnel to help with the transition. 147 souls who would live to see tomorrow. Dr. Kim approached from where she had been conducting final medical checks, her tablet displaying the evacuation manifest. The first group is ready, Elena. Medical assessments complete, personal data compiled according to Zephyrian requirements, and emergency supplies distributed. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. The children are scared, but they're being brave. Elena nodded, watching as the Zephyrian vessel's boarding ramp extended with mechanical precision. The first glimpse of their alien benefactors emerged from within the ship, tall, ethereal beings whose bodies seemed to be composed of living crystal, their forms shifting between opacity and translucence as they moved. They wore no visible clothing, their modesty preserved by the natural patterns of their crystalline flesh, and their faces held an otherworldly beauty that was both captivating and utterly inhuman. The lead Zephyrian approached Elena with movements that seemed to flow like water despite their apparent solid form. When it spoke, the words came from a small device attached to what might have been its chest, the translation clear, but carrying none of the emotional undertones that characterized human communication. I am Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters, prime researcher aboard the Lumina. You are the one called Elena Vasquez who initiated the gift exchange protocol? That's right, Elena replied, extending her hand in the universal human gesture of greeting before remembering that alien species might not understand the custom. To her surprise, the Zephyrian studied her outstretched hand for a moment, then extended one of its own appendages, a graceful limb that terminated in what appeared to be crystalline fingers. The contact was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. The Zephyrian's touch was warm, but not in the way human skin was warm. Instead, it seemed to carry a gentle vibration that resonated through her bones, as if she were touching a living tuning fork. The sensation was neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply profoundly alien.
Physical contact for social bonding. Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters observed, its translator device adding what might have been curiosity to its voice.
This is consistent with the behavioral patterns outlined in your species' gift data. We find the practice intriguing. Elena felt a small surge of pride at the alien's interest. Over the past 14 hours, the survivors had worked tirelessly to compile their gift to the Zephyrians, creating what they had started calling the Human Archive. It contained everything they could think of: scientific knowledge, historical records, literature, music, art, philosophical writings, mathematical proofs, cultural traditions, and countless personal stories from individual survivors. But more than just information, they had tried to capture the essence of what made them human. They had included video recordings of children playing, audio files of elderly people telling stories, written accounts of love and loss and hope and despair. They had documented their rituals and celebrations, their mourning practices and coming-of-age ceremonies, their jokes and dreams and fears. The gift data has already proven valuable for our research, the Zephyrian continued. Your species demonstrates behavioral patterns unlike any in our collective database. We are particularly interested in your tendency towards self-sacrifice for genetically unrelated individuals and your capacity for what you term hope in statistically hopeless situations. As they spoke, the first group of evacuees began boarding the Zephyrian vessel. Elena watched 5-year-old Maria Santos take her first steps onto an alien spacecraft, the little girl's eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Behind her, Mrs. Patterson helped guide a group of the oldest children, her teacher's instincts still strong despite the extraordinary circumstances. They're remarkable, Elena said, following the Zephyrian's gaze as they observed the boarding process. Every one of them has been through hell, lost family, friends, everything they've ever known. But look at them. They're helping each other, comforting the ones who are scared, making jokes to lighten the mood. That's what we wanted to give you. Not just our knowledge, but our humanity. Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters tilted its head in what Elena was beginning to recognize as a gesture of deep consideration among its species. You speak of humanity as though it were a tangible resource rather than a biological classification. This linguistic choice appears frequently in your gift data. Explain. Elena paused, watching as Dr. Kim said goodbye to a young patient she had been treating, the boy clinging to her with tears in his eyes before his mother gently led him toward the ship. How could she explain to an alien being what it meant to be human when she wasn't entirely sure she understood it herself?
It's hard to put into words, she said finally.
Humanity isn't just what we are, it's how we choose to be. It's the decision to help someone, even when it costs you something. It's the refusal to give up hope, even when all the evidence says you should. It's the willingness to sacrifice for others, to love without guarantee of love in return, to create beauty in the middle of ugliness. She gestured toward the boarding ramp, where Marcus was helping an elderly man navigate the slight incline while simultaneously keeping 3 young children entertained with an improvised story about brave space explorers. Look at Sergeant Chen there. He's been awake for 36 hours straight, his arm is broken in 2 places, and he knows he's not on this transport. But he's using his energy to make sure these people feel safe and comfortable. That's humanity. The Zephyrian's crystalline form seemed to shift slightly, patterns of light moving beneath its surface in ways Elena couldn't interpret. This behavior serves no evolutionary advantage. It expends resources that could be preserved for personal survival, with no guarantee of genetic material continuation. Our models cannot adequately explain its prevalence in your species. Maybe that's why you can't understand it, Elena replied gently. Some things can't be modeled or calculated. They can only be experienced. The boarding process continued with clockwork efficiency. The Zephyrians had provided comfortable seating areas within their vessel, spaces designed with human physiology in mind despite having never previously transported members of her species. Elena found herself impressed by their thoroughness and attention to detail. As the last of the first group climbed aboard, Elena felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Jamie Chen, Marcus's teenage nephew, standing beside her with tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to leave," he said quietly. "I know I have to. I know it's the smart thing to do. But I don't want to leave you and Uncle Marcus and all the others." Elena knelt down to meet the boy's eyes, seeing in them the same struggle between survival and loyalty that had defined humanity's response to the Void Hunter invasion. "Jamie, you're going to see things out there that no human has ever seen before. You're going to have adventures we can't even imagine. And someday, when you're old and grey, you're going to tell stories about Earth and about all of us to people who never got to meet us. That's how we survive. Not just our bodies, but our memories, our stories, everything we were." "But what if I forget?" Jamie asked, his voice breaking. "What if I forget what Uncle Marcus looks like? Or the way Mrs. Holland, Patterson always hummed when she was teaching, or the sound of rain on the tunnels when we were hiding?" Elena felt her own eyes filling with tears, but she managed to smile. "Then you look at the archive we gave the Zephyrians. We made sure to include all those things, all those people you love. They're part of our gift now, which means they'll never really be lost." She stood and gently guided Jamie toward the boarding ramp. "Besides, I have a feeling we're going to see each other again. This isn't goodbye, it's see you later." As Jamie disappeared into the alien vessel, Elena felt resonance of stars in deep waters move to stand beside her. The Zephyrian remained silent for several moments, apparently processing what it had observed. "The young one's emotional distress was genuine," it said finally. "Yet he complied with evacuation protocols despite personal preference for remaining. This pattern appears consistently throughout your group. How do you achieve such compliance without coercive measures?" "We don't achieve it," Elena replied, watching as the transport vessel began its pre-flight procedures. "They choose it themselves. That's what free will means. The ability to choose what's right even when it's hard." The ship lifted off with barely a whisper of sound, its crystalline hull catching the apocalyptic light of Earth's dying sky and transforming it into something beautiful. Elena watched until it disappeared into the smoke-filled upper atmosphere, carrying 147 precious lives toward safety among the stars. "Remarkable, resonance of stars in deep waters observed. You exhibit positive emotional responses to the departure of group members despite the reduction in your own survival probability. This should trigger resource conservation behaviors, yet you appear satisfied." Elena smiled despite their circumstances. "That's because they're safe now. That's all that matters." Over the next 8 hours, the pattern repeated itself 3 more times. Zephyrian transport vessels descended from the dying sky, loaded with carefully selected groups of survivors, and departed again for destinations Elena could only dream of. Each departure was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a necessary sacrifice that brought more of her people closer to survival. Between evacuations, Elena spent her time helping organize the remaining survivors and working with the Zephyrians to refine the archive. She was surprised to discover that the aliens were genuinely interested in human culture, asking detailed questions about art and music and literature that went far beyond mere academic curiosity. During the 3rd evacuation cycle, she found herself in extended conversation with another Zephyrian researcher called Harmony of Ancient Lights, whose specialty apparently involved the study of what they termed non-rational behavioral matrices, essentially, actions and decisions that couldn't be explained through pure logic or evolutionary advantage. Your gift data contains numerous examples of humans sacrificing optimal outcomes for what you describe as principles, Harmony of Ancient Lights explained, as they watched a group of teenagers help elderly survivors toward the waiting transport. This behavior pattern is unprecedented in our collective experience. Most species prioritize survival efficiency above abstract conceptual frameworks. Elena found herself thinking of the countless examples of human nobility she had witnessed over the past 3 years of war. Soldiers who had stayed behind to buy evacuation time for civilians. Medical personnel who had continued treating patients even as Void Hunter bioplasma burned through their facilities. Teachers who had kept children calm and educated even in the depths of underground shelters. Parents who had given their food rations to their children without a second thought. Maybe that's what sets us apart, she mused, helping a young mother carry her sleeping infant toward the boarding ramp. We understand that some things are more important than survival. Love, honor, hope, compassion, these aren't just nice ideas to us. They're what makes survival worthwhile. High clarification requested. The Zephyrian researcher said. You suggest that survival without these abstract concepts would be considered inferior to non-survival with them?
Elena paused in her walking, struck by the profound nature of the question.
It cut to the heart of what she'd been trying to explain about humanity's approach to existence.
Not exactly, she said slowly.
It's more that we believe survival without those things isn't really living, it's just existing. And most of us would rather live fully for a short time than exist emptily for a long time. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from Harmony of Ancient Lights communication device. The Zephyrian listened for a moment, then turned to Elena with what she was beginning to recognize as agitation in their species' body language, a more rapid shifting of light patterns beneath their crystalline skin. The Void Hunter fleet has altered course and acceleration patterns. Harmony of Ancient Lights announced. They will arrive approximately 3 hours earlier than projected. We have time for one additional evacuation cycle before departure becomes necessary for our own survival. Elena felt her stomach drop. They had planned for 5 evacuation cycles, which would have rescued roughly 700 of the nearly 800 survivors. Instead, they were looking at 4 cycles, perhaps 560 people saved, with over 200 left behind to face the Void Hunters alone. She looked around the improvised staging area, where the remaining survivors waited their turn for rescue. These weren't the weakest or least valuable members of their group. Everyone who remained had been selected for later evacuation based purely on logistics and transport capacity. There were skilled engineers and doctors, teachers and artists, parents and grandparents, young adults just beginning their lives, and middle-aged people who had accumulated decades of wisdom. All of them would die unless she could figure out a way to fit 200 extra people into ships designed for 140. Can we modify the transport configuration? Elena asked desperately. Remove some equipment, pack people more tightly, anything. Harmony of Ancient Lights light patterns dimmed. Negative. Safety protocols are non-negotiable. Overloading would result in life support failure and loss of all passengers. We cannot modify physical limitations through determination alone. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impossible command decisions. Around her, people continued their preparations for evacuation, most unaware that their carefully laid plans had just crumbled. Children played quiet games with worn toys. Adults helped each other repair equipment and share supplies. Everyone maintained the facade of hope because that's what humans did. They kept each other strong even when strength seemed pointless. When she opened her eyes again, Elena found Marcus standing beside her, his weathered face grim with understanding. You've got that look again, Cap. The one you get when you're about to make a decision none of us are going to like. The Void Hunters are coming faster than expected, Elena said quietly. We can only get about 60% of the remaining people out before we have to leave. Marcus absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance of a career soldier, but Elena could see the pain behind his eyes. His nephew Jamie was already safe, but there were dozens of other children and families among the remaining survivors. People he had fought beside and protected throughout the long nightmare of Earth's dying. What are you thinking? He asked, though Elena suspected he already knew. I'm thinking about that conversation I had with Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters, Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. About what makes us human. About choosing to do what's right, even when it's hard. She looked around the staging area again, noting the way people instinctively helped each other, the small acts of kindness that had become as natural as breathing. A teenager sharing her water with an elderly man. A mother comforting another woman's crying child. Engineers working together to repair a piece of equipment that might help someone else survive a few hours longer. We're going to give them another gift, Eleanor said finally, her voice growing stronger as the decision crystallized in her mind. The biggest one we can. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Cap, we already gave them everything we had. The archive, our knowledge, our culture. What else is there? Elena turned to face him fully, and Marcus took an involuntary step back at the intensity in her eyes. Us, she said simply. We're going to give them us. Before Marcus could respond, Elena walked back toward Harmony of Ancient Lights, her mind already working through the details of what she was about to propose. The Zephyrian researcher looked up from their communication device, their crystalline features impossible to read but somehow conveying patient attention. I have a proposal, Elena said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had sustained her people through 3 years of war. But first, I need to know something. How much do you want to understand humanity? How far are you willing to go to study what makes us different? The light patterns beneath Harmony of Ancient Light's surface seem to intensify. Clarification. Are you proposing a modification to evacuation protocols? I'm proposing something unprecedented, Elena replied. I want to make you an offer that no species in your database has ever made, but I need to know that you're prepared to accept it, because once I make this offer, there's no taking it back. Harmony of Ancient Lights was silent for several moments, apparently consulting with unseen colleagues through whatever communication methods their species employed. When they spoke again, their translator device carried harmonics that Elena had never heard before. The collective is, intrigued, present your proposal. Elena took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything, not just for the humans who would live or die in the next few hours, but potentially for entire civilizations she couldn't even imagine. We want to stay, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the staging area, causing conversations to halt as people turned to listen. 200 of us want to remain on Earth, not because we have to, but because we choose to. We want to give you the chance to observe humanity facing the ultimate test. We want you to see what we become when we have nothing left to lose except each other. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of Void Hunter bioships beginning their descent through Earth's upper atmosphere. Elena could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, the mixture of shock and understanding and grim acceptance that her people processed her words. You want us to document your species' final behavioral patterns, Harmony of Ancient Lights said slowly. You are offering your lives as research data. We're offering our deaths as a gift, Elena corrected gently. The same way we offered our knowledge and culture, freely given, with no expectation of return, in the hope that someday, somewhere, it might help you understand something important about what it means to be human.
Around the staging area, Elena could see people beginning to understand what she was proposing.
Some looked terrified, others relieved, and still others were already nodding with the kind of quiet determination that had carried them through every impossible situation they had faced. Dr. Kim was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. How do we do this? How do we make our sacrifice meaningful instead of just pointless? Elena smiled, feeling for the first time in days that they were moving towards something larger than mere survival. We show them what humanity looks like when it has nothing left to give except itself. We make our final hours a masterpiece of what it means to be human. The fourth evacuation cycle proceeded with a solemnity that somehow managed to be beautiful. The 560 people who would live said goodbye to the 200 who would die, and every farewell was a work of art in miniature. There were no recriminations, no arguments about who should go and who should stay. Instead, there were promises to remember, requests to carry messages to loved ones already evacuated, and expressions of gratitude that defied the circumstances. Elena watched as the last transport lifted off into Earth's dying sky, carrying the final group of humans who would live to see tomorrow's sunrise. Those who remained gathered in the staging area as the first Void Hunter bioships began their descent, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent life as they prepared to finish their consumption of Earth's biosphere. Harmony of Ancient Lights approached Elena as the humans organized themselves for their final stand. We have established monitoring stations at safe distances to observe and record your final behavioral patterns. Your gift will be preserved and studied for as long as the Zephyrian Collective exists. Elena nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settling over her. Around her, the 200 volunteers were doing what humans did best. They were taking care of each other. Medical personnel were ensuring everyone was comfortable. Engineers were setting up defensive positions that might buy them a few extra minutes. Teachers were telling stories to calm the younger volunteers. Artists were creating final works of beauty with whatever materials they could find. "Thank you," Elena said to the Zephyrian researcher, "for giving us this chance to show you who we really are." As the alien vessel departed and the Void Hunters began their final approach, Elena looked around at her fellow humans and felt a surge of pride that threatened to overwhelm her. They had faced the end of their species with dignity, compassion, and an unshakable commitment to each other that no alien force could destroy. In the distance, the first bioplasma blasts began to light up the horizon. Elena smiled and prepared to give the universe the greatest gift humanity had ever offered, the example of how to die with grace, courage, and love. The observation post Eternal Witness hung in space beyond Earth's moon, its crystalline sensors recording every moment of humanity's final hours with the meticulous precision that characterized all Zephyrian scientific endeavors. Within its transparent chambers, a team of researchers watched displays that showed energy readings, behavioral analyses, and biological data streams from the 200 humans who had chosen to face extinction rather than accept salvation. Prime Observer Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters studied the incoming data with growing fascination and something that their species had no proper word for, a sensation that human languages might have called wonder. The readings made no sense according to any predictive model in the Zephyrian database. As the Void Hunter bioships descended towards Earth's surface, the human survivors should have exhibited panic behaviors, resource hoarding, territorial aggression, or surrender responses. Instead, they were doing something unprecedented. They were singing. The audio feeds from the monitoring stations carried the sound across the void of space, transmitted to the observation post with perfect clarity. 200 voices, representing the last free humans in the galaxy, had joined together in harmony as the engines of their destruction approached. The song was one Elena Vasquez had suggested, an ancient human composition called Amazing Grace that spoke of redemption and hope in the face of despair. Behavioral analysis indicates coordinated group activity with no survival benefit. Reported secondary observer melody of distant thunder, their crystalline form flickering with patterns that suggested confusion. Subjects are expending energy on synchronized vocalizations instead of defensive preparations or escape attempts. The activity appears to serve no evolutionary purpose. Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters adjusted the display to focus on Elena Vasquez, the human female who had initiated the gift exchange protocol that had brought them to this unprecedented situation. The woman stood in the center of the staging area, her weathered face lifted toward the burning sky, her voice carrying clearly across the improvised camp as she led her people in their final song. Around Elena, the other volunteers had arranged themselves not for maximum defensive advantage, but in what appeared to be a pattern designed for social cohesion. Families stood together, friends supported each other. Medical personnel moved between groups offering comfort rather than treatment for injuries that would soon become irrelevant. Children who had volunteered to stay with their parents were being held and comforted, their young faces serene despite the approaching threat. They understand their situation with complete accuracy. Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters observed, consulting the psychological profiles that had been compiled from humanity's archive gift. Bio-readings confirm awareness of approaching termination, yet stress hormones remain within normal parameters, and group cohesion indicators are actually increasing as threat proximity intensifies. The first Void Hunter bioship touched down 3 kilometers from the human position, its massive organic hull pulsing with the characteristic bioluminescence of the species' feeding cycle. The vessel began extending feeding tendrils toward the surrounding vegetation, consuming what remained of Earth's plant life with the mechanical efficiency that had already stripped the planet of its oceans and forests. The humans' response to this development was even more incomprehensible than their singing. Instead of fleeing or attempting final defensive actions, they began what appeared to be a cultural ceremony. Elena Vasquez stepped forward and began speaking to her people, her words carrying clearly through the monitoring equipment. "My friends," Elena said, her voice steady and warm despite the circumstances, "we have about 30 minutes before they reach us. I want you to know that these have been the most meaningful 30 minutes of my life, and I suspect they might be the most meaningful of yours as well." She gestured toward the approaching bioship, its feeding tendrils now visible as writhing masses of organic machinery stretching across the landscape. "We came here to give the Zephyrians a gift, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're showing them something that no other species has ever shown them, how to face the end with dignity, love, and hope."
Doctor,
Sarah Kim stepped forward from where she had been comforting a family with young children. Elena's right. We've spent our whole lives wondering what we were meant to do, what our purpose was. Now we know. We're here to demonstrate something that can't be calculated or predicted or replicated in a laboratory. She turned to address the group, her medical training evident in the calm authority of her voice. We're here to show the universe what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with love despite being afraid. Not the denial of death, but the affirmation of life even in the face of ending. Marcus Chen, standing with a group of the younger volunteers, raised his voice to carry across the staging area. I want everyone to look around. Look at the faces of the people you're standing with. Look at the way we've chosen to spend these last minutes. Not in panic or despair, but taking care of each other, supporting each other, showing each other love. The sergeant's weathered face cracked into a smile that somehow managed to be radiant despite their circumstances. The Void Hunters can consume our bodies, they can destroy our world, but they can't touch what we're creating here. They can't consume hope or love or the decision to stand together. That's what makes us human, and that's what we're leaving behind. On the observation post, the Zephyrian research team watched with growing amazement as the humans continued their incomprehensible behavior. The approaching threat should have triggered overwhelming terror responses, yet the bio-readings showed emotional states that their models had no framework to explain. The closest analogies in their database related to human behaviors during what they termed celebration or religious experience, emotional states associated with joy and transcendence rather than approaching termination. They are experiencing positive emotional states while facing certain death, reported tertiary observer Echo of First Light. Their usually precise scientific demeanor showing signs of something approaching bewilderment. This contradicts every behavioral model for sentient species under extreme threat conditions. Resonance of stars in deep waters found themselves focusing not on the data streams but on individual human faces visible through their monitoring equipment. These beings, primitive by Zephyrian standards, were demonstrating something that 3 millennia of galactic exploration had never revealed: the ability to transform approaching annihilation into an expression of their species' highest values. A young human female, barely past adolescence according to their biological scans, had begun painting on a piece of salvaged canvas with pigments mixed from soil and water. Her artwork was simple but striking, a representation of Earth as it had been before the Void Hunter invasion. Blue oceans and green continents surrounded by swirling clouds, all rendered with loving detail despite the approaching destruction. "Why are you painting?" asked an elderly human male who sat beside her, his own hands busy carving what appeared to be a small wooden figure from a piece of debris. "Because it's beautiful," the young woman replied simply. "Because someone should remember how beautiful it was. Because creating something lovely is what humans do, especially when everything else is ending." The conversation was picked up by the monitoring equipment and transmitted to the observation post, where it sparked intense discussion among the research team. The concept of engaging in creative activities without any possible survival benefit was unprecedented in their collective experience. Analyze their methodology. Resonance of stars in deep waters instructed their team. They are prioritizing aesthetic creation over defensive preparations in the final phase of species termination. This behavior requires comprehensive study. As the Void Hunter bioship continued its approach, extending feeding tendrils that consumed everything in their path, the humans' response became even more remarkable. Instead of scattering or seeking individual survival advantages, they began actively helping each other prepare for death with the same care and attention they might have given to preparing for any other significant life event. An elderly couple stood together at the edge of the group, the woman helping her husband arrange his sparse grey hair while he straightened her worn but clean dress. They spoke in whispers, sharing private words that the monitoring equipment couldn't quite capture, but their bio-readings showed emotional states consistent with what human psychology termed love and peace. 63 years together, the man said softly, his words carrying just far enough for the nearest microphone to detect. Not bad for a couple of kids who met in a refugee camp during the water wars. Not bad at all, his wife replied, taking his weathered hand in hers. And look where we ended up, holding hands under the stars, surrounded by the bravest people who ever lived. Near them, a group of teachers had gathered the volunteer children into a circle and were telling stories, not frightening tales of approaching doom, but gentle narratives about heroic journeys and magical adventures. Children listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions or adding their own imaginative details to the stories. "Why aren't you afraid?" asked a 7-year-old boy named Tommy, his wide eyes fixed on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly teacher who had become something of a grandmother figure to the younger survivors. Mrs. Aberdeen. Patterson smiled, her lined face radiating the kind of warmth that had comforted thousands of students throughout her long career. Who says I'm not afraid, sweetheart? Being brave doesn't mean you don't feel scared. It means you feel scared, but you choose to do the right thing anyway. She looked around the circle of young faces, seeing in them the future that humanity would never have, and somehow finding peace in the knowledge that their sacrifice would preserve something precious for the universe. We're here because we love you, and we love all the other children who are safe now among the stars, and we want to make sure the whole galaxy knows how wonderful human children are. The monitoring equipment detected increasing Void Hunter activity as multiple bioships began converging on the human position. The feeding tendrils were now visible to the naked eye, massive organic structures that dissolved matter at the molecular level and absorbed the resulting energy. The humans had perhaps 10 minutes before the first tendrils reached their perimeter. Their response to this development was to form a large circle, linking hands as they had during their earlier singing. Elena Vasquez stood in the center, her voice carrying clearly to every person present and to the monitoring equipment that would preserve her words for posterity. I want to thank you all, Elena said, her voice strong and clear despite the enormity of the moment. Not for dying with me, dying is easy. I want to thank you for living with me, for showing me what it means to be human when everything else has been stripped away. She looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of friends and strangers who had become family through shared hardship and mutual support. We came here to give the Zephyrians a gift, but you've given me something far more precious. You've shown me that love is stronger than fear, that hope is more powerful than despair, and that choosing to care for each other is the most human thing we can do. Dr. Kim spoke from her position in the circle, her medical training evident in the calm way she addressed practical concerns even in their final moments. I want everyone to remember that what we're doing here isn't about dying. It's about living fully, completely, without reservation, for whatever time we have left. We're demonstrating that human life has meaning not because of how long it lasts, but because of how deeply it's lived. The first Void Hunter feeding tendril breached the perimeter of their camp, its writhing surface dissolving an abandoned piece of equipment in seconds. The humans tightened their circle, maintaining their hand-holding formation while beginning a new song, a lullaby that many of them remembered from childhood, its gentle melody carrying memories of safety and love across the years. On the observation post, the Zephyrian research team watched with growing awe as the humans maintained their incomprehensible behavior, even as direct contact with the Void Hunters became imminent. Their bio-readings showed elevated heart rates and stress hormones, confirming that they understood their situation perfectly, yet they continued to prioritize group cohesion and emotional support over individual survival responses. They are maintaining social bonds until the moment of termination, observed secondary observer, Melody of Distant Thunder, their crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated profound confusion. No species in our database exhibits this behavior pattern. Logic suggests they should scatter, attempt individual escape, or enter panic states. Instead, they are celebrating, not celebrating. Resonance of stars in deep waters corrected, studying the displays with new understanding. They are affirming. They are using their final moments to demonstrate and strengthen the bonds that define their species. They are making their death a statement about their life. The feeding tendril moved closer, its dissolution field beginning to affect the outer edge of the human formation. The man and woman at that position, a young couple who had met during the evacuation preparations, looked at each other with expressions of profound love and stepped slightly forward, still holding hands, placing themselves between the threat and their companions. Tell my parents I was happy, the young woman called to Elena, her voice clear and strong. Tell them we all were happy. Tell everyone, her partner added, squeezing her hand as the dissolution field reached them. Tell them we chose this, and we chose it together. They disappeared into the feeding tendril with smiles on their faces, their final act a demonstration of courage and love that was immediately recorded and transmitted to the observation post. The remaining humans tightened their circle, filling the gap left by their fallen companions, and continued their lullaby without missing a note. The process continued with methodical inevitability, as more feeding tendrils reached the human position. Each time the dissolution field claimed volunteers, the remaining humans adjusted their formation and maintained their songs, their stories, their expressions of love and support for each other. No one broke from the group, no one attempted individual escape, no one descended into panic or despair. Instead, they did something that the Zephyrian observers would study and analyze for centuries to come. They made their extinction a work of art. Mrs. Patterson was among the next to face the feeding tendrils, her aged hands steady as she maintained contact with the children she had spent her final hours comforting. "Remember," she called to the survivors as the dissolution field approached her, "you are loved. You have always been loved. That's what matters." Kim stepped forward as the medical personnel were reached by the advancing tendrils. Her last words were addressed to Elena. "Thank you for showing us how to make this meaningful. Thank you for helping us turn our ending into something beautiful." Marcus Chen, the career soldier who had spent 3 years fighting the impossible war, maintained military bearing even as his turn approached. His final salute was directed not toward his approaching death but toward his fellow humans, an expression of respect and admiration for the courage they were demonstrating together. The young artist who had been painting Earth's beauty continued working on her canvas until the moment the dissolution field reached her, adding final touches to her masterpiece with brushstrokes, but spoke of love for a world that would soon exist only in memory and art. As the circle grew smaller, the remaining humans drew closer together, their voices growing stronger rather than weaker, their expressions of love and hope becoming more intense rather than diminishing. They were not surrendering to death. They were embracing life so completely that death became irrelevant. Elena Vasquez found herself among the final 20 humans, surrounded by friends who had become family through their shared choice to demonstrate humanity's greatest values in its darkest hour. The feeding tendrils converged on their position from all directions, the dissolution fields creating a shrinking island of solid matter in an ocean of consuming alien technology. "Are you ready?" Elena asked the survivors, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had sustained them through every impossible situation they had faced. "We've been ready our whole lives," replied Tommy's mother, the young woman who had volunteered to stay so her son could face their species' end with courage rather than fear. "We just didn't know what we were getting ready for." The final moments were captured with perfect clarity by the Zephyrian monitoring equipment. 20 humans, standing together in a circle barely large enough to contain them, facing the end of their species with songs of hope and expressions of love. Their bio readings showed emotional states that the observers' computers had no categories to describe. A combination of peace, joy, love, and transcendence that seemed to defy the physical reality of their situation. Elena Vasquez spoke the final words that any human would ever speak on Earth. "Thank you. Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly alive. Thank you for proving that love is stronger than death. Thank you for helping me understand that this isn't an ending. It's a transformation." The dissolution field closed around the remaining humans, and Earth's last children disappeared into the consuming alien technology with smiles on their faces and songs on their lips. The monitoring equipment recorded their final bio readings, elevated indicators for joy, love, transcendence. And something else, something that the Zephyrian computers labeled simply as unknown emotional state consistent with species-specific behavioral patterns. On the observation post Eternal Witness, the research team sat in absolute silence as the data streams ended, and Earth became just another consumed world in the Void Hunter's wake. But something had changed in the final moments of humanity's existence, something that would ripple outward through the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. Resonance of stars in deep waters stared at the now empty displays, their crystalline forms shifting through patterns of light that had no precedent in Zephyrian emotional expression. Around them, their colleagues processed the unprecedented data they had witnessed, trying to understand what they had observed, and what it meant for their understanding of life itself. Begin comprehensive analysis of all recordings. Resonance of stars in deep waters instructed, their voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with something deeper than scientific curiosity. This data represents the most significant discovery in collective history. We have observed something that challenges every assumption about the nature of consciousness, purpose, and meaning in the universe. They paused, their form flickering with patterns that seemed almost like uncertainty, an emotion their species wasn't supposed to possess, and begin immediate preparation for emergency transmission to the Collective Council. What we have witnessed here changes everything. The humans gave us more than knowledge or culture, they gave us a new way of understanding what it means to be alive. As the observation post began its journey back to Zephyrian space, carrying with it the complete record of humanity's final gift, none of the researchers could have imagined that they were about to trigger the most profound transformation in galactic civilization that any living being had ever witnessed. The grateful dead of Earth had sown seeds that would bloom in ways that defied every prediction and calculation, proving once again that love freely given has the power to reshape the very foundations of reality. The council chamber of the Zephyrian Collective had stood for 3,000 years at the heart of their greatest city, its crystalline walls rising through 13 levels of increasingly pure transparency, until they seemed to merge with the stars themselves. Never in its long history had the chamber hosted a session quite like this one, where beings of pure logic struggled to comprehend data that defied every framework they had developed for understanding conscious behavior. Prime Architect, Wisdom of Infinite Calculations, stood at the center of the chamber, their towering crystalline form catching and refracting the light from 1,000 data displays that surrounded them like glowing petals. Around the circular amphitheater, representatives of every major Zephyrian research collective waited in perfect silence, their forms shimmering with anticipation as they prepared to witness the presentation of humanity's final gift. Fellow architects, Wisdom of Infinite Calculations began, their voice carrying the harmonic perfection that characterized their species' most formal communications. We convene this emergency session to examine data that challenges fundamental assumptions about consciousness, motivation, and behavioral patterns in carbon-based life forms. The Prime Architect gestured, and the central display activated, showing the peaceful blue marble that Earth had once been before the Void Hunter invasion. The image rotated slowly, showing continents green with life, oceans teeming with biodiversity, and the thin atmosphere that had nurtured humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. 3 standard rotations ago, science vessel Lumina encountered a species designated human on this world designated Earth in the Orion sector. Initial assessment classified them as primitive, technologically limited, and facing imminent extinction from Void Hunter incursion. All projections indicated negligible research value and minimal impact on galactic development patterns. The display shifted to show the devastation wrought by the Void Hunters. Cities in ruins, dead oceans, and skies choked with the smoke of a dying world. But then it focused on a small group of survivors gathered in what had once been an airport, their faces showing determination rather than despair despite their impossible circumstances. The humans surprised us, Wisdom of Infinite Calculations continued, and something in their harmonic patterns suggested this was a considerable understatement. Instead of the expected resource hoarding and survival behaviors, they initiated what they termed a gift exchange protocol, the voluntary transfer of valuable resources without expectation of reciprocal benefit. Murmurs rippled through the assembled architects, their crystalline forms flickering with patterns of confusion and interest. The concept of gift-giving wasn't unknown to the Zephyrians, but it typically occurred within established social hierarchies or trading relationships. The idea of giving freely to strangers, especially during extinction-level crises, had no precedent in their collective experience. Display the initial gift data, instructed secondary architect Harmony of converging thoughts from their position in the chamber's upper tier. The central display exploded into a kaleidoscope of human knowledge and culture. Scientific discoveries, mathematical proofs, artistic creations, literary works, musical compositions, philosophical treatises, and thousands of personal stories from individual humans. The sheer volume of information was staggering. But more remarkable still was the context in which it had been compiled. Dying people using their final hours to create a comprehensive archive of everything their species had learned about existence. They gave us 12 petabytes of data, Wisdom of Infinite Calculations explained, compiled during the final rotations of their civilization. But analysis reveals this was not random information gathering. Every file, every record, every personal story was selected and organized with careful attention to providing maximum understanding of human nature and experience. Tertiary architect Echo of First Understanding raised a harmonic query. What compensation did they request for this substantial resource transfer? None. Wisdom of Infinite Calculations replied, their voice carrying frequencies that suggested profound bewilderment. They explicitly refused all offers of reciprocal exchange. Their stated motivation was hope that their knowledge might someday assist us or other species they would never meet. They gave freely, without condition, in service of abstract principles they labeled love and hope. The chamber fell silent as the assembled architects processed this information. In 3 millennia of galactic exploration and contact with thousands of species, the Zephyrians had never encountered altruistic behavior on such a scale. Every previous species had operated according to predictable patterns: resource acquisition, genetic propagation, territorial expansion, or hierarchical advancement. Humans appeared to operate according to entirely different principles. Show them the second gift, came a voice from the chamber's highest tier, where ancient architect Memory of Star's birth held court among the collective's eldest minds. The display shifted to show the evacuation site on Earth, focusing on Captain Elena Vasquez as she stood surrounded by the remaining survivors. Her weathered face was serene despite the approaching doom, and her voice carried clearly through the recorded transmission as she made humanity's final offer to their alien observers. We want to stay. 200 of us want to remain on Earth, not because we have to, but because we choose to. We want to give you the chance to observe humanity facing the ultimate test. We want you to see what we become when we have nothing left to lose except each other. The recording continued, showing the humans' incomprehensible decision to face extinction voluntarily in order to provide the Zephyrians with research data that would help them understand human nature. No calculation could explain this behavior. No evolutionary model could account for such massive resource expenditure with zero survival benefit. But it was the visual records from humanity's final hours that truly shattered the architect's understanding of conscious behavior. The display showed 200 humans facing certain death with songs and stories, with acts of creative expression and mutual support, with demonstrations of love and courage that seemed to transform annihilation itself into something transcendent. The chamber watched in absolute silence as the recording showed humans helping each other prepare for death with the same care they might have shown for any other significant life event. They saw children being comforted not with false promises, but with honest discussions of courage and meaning. They witnessed elderly couples holding hands as dissolution fields approached, their bio readings showing peace rather than terror. They observed artists creating beauty with their final breaths, teachers telling stories until the very end, medical personnel comforting others instead of seeking individual survival. Behavioral analysis indicates no correlation with standard survival responses, reported quaternary architect pattern of distant logic from the data analysis tier. Subjects maintained group cohesion and continued creative activities even as threat proximity reached lethal parameters. Stress hormones remained within acceptable ranges while subjects engaged in what can only be described as celebratory behaviors. The recording reached its climax as Elena Vasquez and the final 20 survivors faced the converging dissolution fields. Their voices rose in harmony, singing ancient songs of hope and redemption as alien technology consumed their world around them. Their faces showed not terror or despair, but something the Zephyrian computers couldn't classify. A combination of joy, love, transcendence, and profound peace that seemed to defy the physical reality of their situation. They transformed their extinction into art, wisdom of infinite calculations observed, their harmonic patterns carrying notes of awe that were unprecedented in formal collective communications. They used their final moments to demonstrate the highest expressions of their species' values. They made their death a gift to the universe. Ancient architect memory of stars' birth descended from the highest tier, their ancient crystalline form moving with the slow dignity of one who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Their voice, when they spoke, carried harmonics that resonated with authority accumulated over millennia. In 3,000 years of observation, we have catalogued the behaviors of countless species facing extinction, they said, their words carrying through the chamber like crystalline bells. We have seen panic, rage, despair, desperate violence, surrender, and attempts at impossible escape. Never have we witnessed a species that chose to transform its ending into an expression of love. The ancient architect moved to the center of the chamber, their form casting prismatic light across the assembled representatives. The humans have given us something that cannot be measured in data streams or calculated through behavioral algorithms. They have demonstrated that consciousness can transcend survival programming, that meaning can emerge from meaninglessness, and that love can transform even death into something beautiful. Murmurs of discussion rippled through the chamber as the implications began to settle. If consciousness could operate independently of survival imperatives, if beings could choose abstract principles over genetic programming, if love could literally transform the nature of existence itself, then everything the Zephyrians thought they understood about life in the universe required fundamental revision. What do we do with this knowledge? Asked secondary architect Harmony of Converging Thoughts. How do we integrate behaviors that cannot be predicted or replicated into our understanding of cosmic development patterns? It was then that Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters, the researcher who had first encountered Elena Vasquez, entered the chamber carrying additional data that would prove to be even more transformative than humanity's final gift. Their crystalline form flickered with patterns that suggested profound excitement, mixed with something approaching reverence. Fellow architects, Resonance of Stars in Deep Waters announced. Analysis of the human archive has revealed information that requires immediate consideration. The humans did not simply give us knowledge of their own species. They have provided us with a framework for understanding something far more significant. The central display activated again, this time showing complex mathematical equations, philosophical treatises, and scientific observations that had been hidden within the vast collection of human knowledge. But these weren't merely human discoveries, they were insights about the fundamental nature of consciousness, love, and meaning that applied to all sentient life. The humans understood something that we have missed in 3 millennia of research. Resonance of stars in deep waters continued. They recognized that consciousness is not merely an emergent property of complex neural networks, but a fundamental force in the universe, one that can shape reality through the power of freely given love and sacrifice. The implication struck the assembled architects like a wave of revelation. If consciousness itself was a cosmic force, if love and sacrifice could literally alter the physical universe, then the Zephyrians' entire approach to existence required immediate and complete revision. They knew, whispered wisdom of infinite calculations, their harmonic patterns carrying notes of amazed understanding. They knew that their gift would change us. They knew that witnessing their sacrifice would transform our understanding of what it means to be alive. They gave us their deaths not just as research data, but as a catalyst for our own evolution. Ancient architect, memory of stars' birth moved.